So today, hope you are also good. So today we discuss the architecture of Spring 6 security. So how that internal functionality of the authentication happens when any we request comes and we send the till output response. So Spring, first of all, I would like to explain Spring security is also a sub framework of the Spring framework. Like we today work most on the Spring Boot application, which we call the production ready. It is a topmost layer on a Spring framework. So similarly, Spring security is also a sub framework in between the Spring frameworks, like Spring security, Spring Hetios, Spring Webflux. So there are many frameworks inside a Spring frameworks. So coming to Spring security, first of all, why we need a Spring security? Because there are today when we make any web application, we have a different type of APIs like protected APIs, public APIs. Public and protected, I mean, like whenever you hit the request either from your Postman or from your web application, it directly comes and traverse your business logic and send the response out to the UI. That was a public API, but some APIs are protected API. Protected in the sense means whenever a request comes, it would not directly go till where you have written your business logic inside a service class. First of all, we need some authentication mechanisms to authenticate that either it is useful for us to authenticate, or because some other attackers, some hackers also can use your API. So that's why to avoid those things, we need security layer on our application. So security, that's why security is important. So when it comes to the security, so in Spring Security, we have a Spring Security filters. There is a lot of filters. Approximately, if I tell you, there are approximately 20 types of Spring Security filters. So whenever your request comes, as you see in the diagram, so whenever your request comes, it first of all goes to Spring Security filter. So after whatever filter we apply, so after filtering that, after parsing their request, when that is coming either from the UI, or if you are testing, you are using Postman or any other tool. So the main thing is request coming to our application. So once the request is coming, the Spring Security filters, we apply Spring Security, means the layer of security. After that, it will convert those Spring Security filter object to the authentication object. So authentication is nothing, just it is a, you can say, a bridge between the Spring Security filter object to the Spring Authentication Manager object. It is a bridge which will authenticate your user ID, passwords, and rest of the metadata which your request have. So once your control then comes to Authentication Manager, this is a bit important part, because man, it is a kind of, it is doing the management thing. Like authentication manager is the only thing which will decide what authentication, to which authentication provider your request has to be given. Because what we have one, after the authentication manager, when authentication manager sends the control to authentication provider contain the list of authentication provider which you declared in your web application. Like either you using OAuth authentication, JWT authentication, DAO authentication, or if you do some customization logic, so there can be chance that developer have written some customization authentication logic. So whatever is your provider, so the request will go to that. So that is the responsibility of your authentication manager, to take your request to that particular authentication provider to validate, you can say, to validate. So one more thing, whenever your request goes from authentication manager to authentication provider, it doesn't mean, like for example, if your request first comes to authentication provider, for example DAO authentication, which I mentioned in the screen, you can say. So if your request fails there, it doesn't directly send the response back to your UI or your Postman that request is failed. No, it will go to the different authentication provider like JWT or whatever you have declared in your web application till, because there can be chance if one is failed, maybe your request get a success with second one. But in case if you have declared whatever authentication, if all are failed, then your request send a final response as a failed. So once your request comes to authentication provider, further we it goes into two parts. user detail service. So user detail service is important because whatever details, because whenever we have authentication object after our security filters that have the username, passwords, and some metadata type of information. So user detail service will process that, and the password thing, we doesn't directly store our password in a database as a plain password which user sends in the request. We will do it in the encrypted format by this password encoder encryption. There is some encryption logic inside this interface that Spring uses internally by its own. You don't have to take, you just have to use this interface. So once you use this user detail service password encoder, so if these still here, if each and every step you are succeeded, then your request is success with your Spring security filter, and then your authentication provider response will send back to your authentication manager further still back send a response to your authentication object. It will again send back response to your filter. So here filter, now there is a one break. So after getting a response from authentication object back to the Spring security filter, it will first save all those data in a Spring security context. It is a thing or entity, you can say, where this Spring security architecture internally save each and everything, whether the request is success or whether the request get failed or whatever it is, any exception or whatever it is coming. So after storing here, then it send the response back to the UI, which you can see. So this is the internal logic of the Spring 6 security architecture. That is pretty much simple and explained well in the diagram. So if you have any doubt, you can comment below, or if you like the video, thanks for watching. Okay.